Let me share a personal story with you, something that has left me deeply unsettled, and I could use some advice. The damage is already done, and now I'm trying to avoid making things worse or stumbling into more mistakes. I'm 35 years old, and my wife, Susan, is 2 years younger than me. We've been married for 14 years, and for most of that time, we were inseparable. We have two wonderful children, our son Oliver, who's now 13, and our daughter Amelia, who's just 6. This year has been a big one for us, with Amelia starting school for the first time. And it's been a whirlwind of emotions watching her grow up so quickly. This past summer, Oliver told me he wanted to go to a military sports camp. I was determined to make it happen for him. Through a friend of mine, I managed to pull some strings and secure a spot for him. But before he could go, we had to complete all the necessary medical checkups, including some blood tests to make sure he was fit and healthy. It seemed routine at the time, nothing out of the ordinary. Now, I've never been particularly mindful about my own blood type. I could never seem to remember it. But I always knew Susan's. She has type 3. So, when we went to the clinic and Oliver's results came back, the nurse told us his blood type was 1. It caught me off guard, but I brushed it off initially. Here's where things took a strange turn. Since the doctor handling the test was a close friend of mine, he casually suggested that I check my blood type while we were there. Why not, I thought. Might as well. So, I got tested too, and to my surprise, it turns out I have type 4 blood. I'll never forget the moment when my friend, the doctor, looked up from the results, furrowing his brow. Something was clearly troubling him. He leaned in and asked quietly, making sure Oliver wasn't around to hear, "Are you sure you didn't adopt him?" At that instant, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. I immediately told him no, that Oliver is our biological son, without a shadow of a doubt. But the doctor shook his head and explained something that chilled me to the core. With a mother who has type 3 blood and a father with type 4, it's impossible for a child to have type 1. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, but I needed clarity, not confusion. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I asked my friend for the address of a lab that could perform a paternity test. I started gathering what I needed, driven by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. I found a piece of gum that Oliver had tossed in the trash and carefully collected a few strands of hair from my wife's brush. I wasn't prepared to jump to conclusions, especially when it came to Susan. I never once doubted her faithfulness in all our years together. She's been nothing but a loving wife and a loyal partner, someone who stood by me in every storm. There wasn't a single moment that made me question her devotion to our family. The idea of her being unfaithful seemed utterly unimaginable to me. In my mind, I cycled through every possible explanation. Maybe there was some rare genetic anomaly, or worse, maybe there had been a mix-up at the hospital when Oliver was born. I was grasping at straws, clinging to any hope that would make sense of this baffling situation. But when the test results finally came back, they shattered the last remnants of my fragile hope. The lab confirmed that Susan was indeed Oliver's biological mother, but the shocking truth I had feared most was also true. I wasn't his biological father. I was devastated. It felt like the world had crumbled around me. I convinced myself that there had to be some mistake, some mix-up in the results. Clinging to that hope, I decided to double-check everything. I had a paternity test done for my daughter, Amelia, just to be sure. Thankfully, those results confirmed that she was indeed my biological child, which brought a small sense of relief amidst the chaos. But with Oliver, I wasn't ready to give up. I took his DNA to another clinic, hoping against hope that the first test had been wrong. But the second set of results came back the same. It was undeniable. I realized I had no choice but to have a serious conversation with Susan. The weight of what I had discovered was crushing, and I had no idea how to even begin such a conversation with the woman I loved so deeply. My feelings for her hadn't changed. I loved her with all my heart, but the situation had turned our life upside down. The thought of confronting her with these findings made me feel sick inside. Once Oliver had left for camp and Amelia was staying with her grandmother, I finally gathered the courage to talk to Susan. I showed her the DNA results and laid everything out on the table. The moment she saw the documents, her face turned ghostly pale. She stood there frozen for a moment, and then the tears came. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, and through her tears, she shared a story from her past, something I never could have imagined. It turns out that what she told me answered questions I hadn't even realized I'd been asking myself for the last 13 years. Susan had always believed I was Oliver's father, just as much as I had. The truth she revealed pieced together all the missing parts of this painful puzzle, finally bringing clarity to the situation that had been haunting me for weeks. The thing is, I've had a close friend, Thomas, for as long as I can remember. We've been inseparable ever since high school. He transferred to our class one year, and, as you can imagine, being the new kid wasn't easy. He caught a lot of flack from the others, but I stood up for him during recess, and that was it. We were best friends from that moment on. We shared everything, sat at the same desk, and spent almost all our free time together. After graduation, we both ended up going to the same university, though we chose different majors. I even helped Thomas avoid military service when I managed to secure my exemption. That's how deep our bond ran. One evening, while we were still in our second year of university, we decided to take a walk through the park, looking to meet some girls. We were young, carefree, and life was simple back then. As luck would have it, we spotted two girls who immediately caught our eye, two friends, both pretty in their own way. To make things fair, we decided to let fate decide who would approach whom, playing a quick game of rock, paper, scissors. As a result, I ended up with the tall, athletic blonde with a radiant smile, Susan. Thomas, on the other hand, paired up with a delicate brunette, Emily, who was as slender as a reed. It wasn't long before things got serious. A year later, Susan and I were married. Thomas and Emily were, of course, our witnesses, standing by our sides on one of the most important days of our lives. Just 6 months after our wedding, we found ourselves celebrating again, this time at Thomas and Emily's wedding. Life felt like it was unfolding just as it should, full of promise and shared moments between the two couples. And now we come to the heart of the matter. It all started on that fateful day when I had to leave for a business trip. Right before I left, Susan and I had a huge argument over something completely trivial, but it escalated fast. The tension between us was heavy, and I left in anger. A week later, I returned home, and to my surprise, Susan met me at the door in tears, rushing into my arms, kissing me, holding me tight, and all the while sobbing, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I figured it was because of our argument, one I knew deep down was mostly my fault. I didn't think much of her distress at the time. I assumed she was just feeling guilty, and I was eager to let it go. After all, we made up in the way couples often do, through intimacy, and everything seemed to settle back into place. But then, after that moment of reconciliation, Susan sat me down and told me something that changed everything. She said that the day after I had left, Emily had suddenly fallen gravely ill. The doctors couldn't save her pregnancy, and she had a miscarriage. The complications were severe, and the doctors delivered even worse news. Emily would never be able to have children again. For a week, Susan seemed withdrawn, walking around in a heavy, almost melancholic state. A few more days passed, and then she came to me with unexpected news. She was pregnant. I was thrilled, but at the same time, a wave of concern washed over me, thinking about Emily and Thomas and everything they were going through. Emily had just been discharged from the hospital, and not long after, Thomas made a decision that caught me off guard. He announced that they were moving, not just to a different city, but to an entirely new region. He said they needed a change of scenery, a fresh start after everything that had happened. From that point on, my interactions with Thomas became strained. He was distant, cold even. His responses were short, and his usually calm demeanor had been replaced by a tense, brooding mood. When he heard about Susan's pregnancy, he barely muttered a congratulations, his tone flat and emotionless. That's when the truth began to surface, unraveling everything I thought I knew. On that dreadful day when Emily was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, both Thomas and Susan had gone with her. They stayed by her side, waiting in the hospital until the doctors finally told them to leave. By then, Thomas was shattered, completely broken by the news of the miscarriage and the complications that followed. Susan, too, was overwhelmed by the events, weighed down by her own worries for Emily and still emotionally raw from our argument before I left. As Susan later confessed to me, in that dark moment, when they were left alone together, something shifted. Overcome by despair and grief, both of them found themselves spiraling, caught in a fog of pain and confusion. It was as if a cloud had descended over them, blinding them to reason, and in that state of emotional chaos, they made a mistake, a devastating one. Neither of them understood what they were doing, driven purely by the weight of the sorrow they were both carrying. In the end, they spent the night together. It was the only time Susan had ever been unfaithful to me, but by the next morning, both of them were horrified by what they had done. Thomas, shattered by the gravity of his actions, made the decision to leave. He felt he no longer had the right to call me his friend, admitting to himself that what he had done was unforgivable. He couldn't imagine facing me or Susan again, knowing the betrayal he had committed. He confessed that he would carry the weight of guilt for the rest of his life, especially towards Emily, the person he had hurt the most. Thomas decided that the only way he could even begin to atone for his actions was to distance himself from us, to try and make up for his mistake by dedicating himself to Emily. He felt that by focusing all his love and support on her, he could somehow lessen the burden of what he had done. Susan, racked with her own feelings of shame, agreed with his decision to leave. She, too, was consumed with guilt, not only for betraying me but also for betraying her best friend, Emily. Before leaving, Thomas had one final conversation with Susan. In parting, he told her that they had broken and irreparably damaged the bond we had shared. Yet, even in the aftermath of this betrayal, he expressed a hope, a desperate one, that despite the destruction of our friendship, we might still salvage what was left of our families. In that distant city, they adopted a lovely girl from an orphanage. Over the years, they visited us a few times, but never once did they stay the night. No matter the reason, they always found a hotel. After listening to my wife's full confession, I decided not to act rashly. My feelings towards Oliver would never change. He's still my son, even if not by blood. In the end, I forgave her. Why, you might ask? Let me explain. Throughout all these years, she's shown me over and over again how deeply she loves me. She's always been by my side, even through the darkest moments of my life. She supported me in everything, stood by me when I needed her most. She's not the type to stray. Family has always been her highest priority. Yes, it happened. People make mistakes, and everyone deserves at least one. That moment of weakness doesn't erase everything good she's done for me. Without her unwavering support, I don't think I would have made it through back then. As for Oliver, she didn't deceive me by giving me someone else's child. She truly believed I was his father, not realizing that a single time could lead to a pregnancy. To her, I've always been Oliver's dad. I forgave my friend too. Yes, what he did was a betrayal, but I could see he was truly remorseful. Holding on to grudges from the past serves no purpose. In fact, my wife and I have had many conversations about this, and I firmly believe that Thomas deserves to know the truth. It's inhumane to keep something as significant as a son hidden from him. But Susan refuses to even consider it. She's convinced that revealing the truth could shatter not just our family, but Thomas and Emily's as well. Her reasoning is that she loves me, and Thomas loves Emily. He never abandoned her, even when they found out she couldn't have children of her own. Susan believes that nothing will ever happen between her and Thomas again. So why complicate things? She's also worried about the possibility that Thomas might want to take Oliver from us. After all, they don't have any biological children of their own, aside from the girl they adopted. So, she's adamant about keeping the secret. Still, I can't shake the feeling that Thomas has a right to know that he has a son growing up without his knowledge. I'm not going to divorce my wife. I trust her love for me, and I love her too. That's not up for debate. But the question that keeps haunting me is whether or not to tell Thomas about his son. Or should I carry this burden in silence for the rest of my life? As for Oliver, we won't say anything to him just yet. He'll find out the truth when the time is right.